I never thought the night I'd be thrown out like garbage would be the same night that changed everything. But there I was, soaking wet in the pouring rain, cradling my newborn son Leo, with a broken leg, watching through the glass door, as my own father's stepmother and sister laughed at my misery. That moment, that single cruel moment when the door slammed shut, was when I realized I had been living in hell and calling it home. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, if you've ever given everything only to be treated like nothing, then stay with me. This story gets darker before it gets better, but I promise you the ending will leave you speechless. Hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment telling me what you would have done in my situation. Now let me take you back to where it all began. To the moment my life shattered into 1,000 pieces. The story really starts 10 years before that rainy night, when I was 16 years old and my mother died of cancer. She'd been sick for 2 years, slowly wasting away in that hospital bed we'd set up in the living room because she couldn't manage the stairs anymore. I'd spent those 2 years becoming someone I never wanted to be: a teenager who knew how to measure morphine doses, who could change IV bags, who held a vomit basin with steady hands while my mother's body rejected another round of chemo. My father, Frank, worked long hours at the factory. Or at least that's what he told me. Looking back now, I think he just couldn't bear to watch her die. So it was me, 16 years old, missing school to take mom to appointments, learning to cook, because she couldn't keep down most foods, sleeping on the couch next to her bed because I was terrified she'd die alone in the night. I'd hold her hand for hours while she slept, feeling how thin her fingers had become, how her wedding ring kept sliding off because she'd lost so much weight. The night before she died, she was lucid for the first time in weeks. She grabbed my hand with surprising strength and pulled me close. "Clara, baby, listen to me. Your father, he's not as strong as you think. When I'm gone, he's going to need someone. But you need to take care of yourself first. Promise me you'll take care of yourself." "I promise, Mom." I was crying so hard I could barely speak. "But you're not going anywhere. You're going to beat this." She smiled sadly, that knowing smile mothers have when their children are lying to themselves. "We both know that's not true. Just remember, you're stronger than anyone gives you credit for. Especially your father. Don't let anyone make you forget that." She died the next morning at 6:15. I was holding her hand. Frank was at work. He'd left at 5:30 for an early shift, and when I called him to tell him she was gone, I heard something in the background, a woman's voice asking if everything was okay. He said he'd be right home and hung up before I could ask who that was. At the funeral 3 days later, I found out. Her name was Sharon, and she was there with her daughter Jessica, both dressed in black, like they'd actually known my mother. Sharon had worked in the factory's HR department. She'd been widowed 2 years before her husband dying in a car accident, and apparently she and Frank had been having coffee in the break room for months. "Just talking," Frank said, when I confronted him in the parking lot after the service. "We were just friends. She was helping me cope." But the way she touched his arm, the way she looked at him, that wasn't friendship. And when I saw Jessica, this girl my age with perfect makeup and designer clothes, even for a funeral, looking at our house through the car window like she was already measuring it for new curtains, I felt something cold settle in my stomach. At first, I tried to give them the benefit of the doubt. I was so desperately lonely in that empty house surrounded by my mother's things. Her coffee mug still sat by the sink. Her reading glasses were on the side table. Her sweater hung on the back of the kitchen chair. The house smelled like her lavender lotion and the flowers from the funeral, and the silence was so heavy I could barely breathe. 2 weeks after the funeral, Frank came home with an announcement. "Sharon and I have been talking. She's been a real help to me during this difficult time. We've decided to start seeing each other officially." "Dad," I said, carefully setting down my homework, "Mom just died 2 weeks ago." "Your mother wanted me to be happy," he said, not meeting my eyes. "She wouldn't want me to be alone. But what about me? Don't I matter? Aren't we supposed to grieve together? You're 16, Clara. You'll be off to college in 2 years. I need to think about my future too." That stung more than I wanted to admit. But I told myself maybe it was grief talking, maybe he just needed time. So when Sharon started coming over for dinner, I was polite. When Jessica started tagging along, I tried to be friendly. I even offered to help Jessica with her homework when I noticed she was struggling in algebra, the same subject I was good at. She looked at me like I'd offered her poison. "I don't need help from you," she said, flipping her hair over her shoulder. "My mom says you're just trying to make yourself look good." 4 months after my mother died, Frank sat me down at dinner. "Clara, I have some news. Sharon and I are getting married." The piece of chicken I was chewing turned to sawdust in my mouth. What when? Next month, we're having a small ceremony, just family. Sharon and Jessica are going to move in. Don't I get a say in this? This is Mom's house. Her things are still everywhere. His face hardened. This is my house, Clara. Your mother is gone. Life goes on. Sharon moved in 3 weeks later, and it was like watching someone erase my mother from existence in real time. On the first day I came home from school to find Sharon directing 2 men from a donation truck. They were loading my mother's favorite armchair, the one she'd nursed me in as a baby, the one she'd read to me from for 16 years, into their truck. Wait, I ran toward them. That's my mom's chair. You can't take that. Sharon turned to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Clara, honey, it's just taking up space. And it has stains. We need room for my furniture. But that's my mom's chair. Dad, I called toward the house. Dad, tell them to stop. Frank appeared in the doorway, saw what was happening, and just shook his head. Let it go, Clara. Sharon's right, we need to make space. I stood there on the lawn, watching them load box after box of my mother's things. Her books, her photo albums, her dishes, her blankets. Everything that made this house ours. Everything that smelled like her and reminded me she'd existed, being carted away while Frank and Sharon stood on the porch, his arm around her waist. Jessica found me crying in my room that night. She stood in my doorway, not even pretending to be sympathetic. You know your mom's dead, right? Like completely dead. This crying thing is pathetic. My dad's been dead for 2 years, and you don't see me acting like this. Get out of my room. She laughed. It's not your room anymore. My mom says I'm getting this room. It's bigger than the guest room and has better light. You're moving to the attic next week, over my dead body. We'll see what Frank says about that. She turned and walked away, and I heard her voice carrying down the hallway. Mom, Clara's being difficult again. I did end up in the attic. Frank said it made sense that Jessica was my sister now, and we needed to learn to share that I was being selfish, wanting to keep the bigger room. The attic was cramped and hot in summer, freezing in winter, and smelled like old insulation. But it became my sanctuary, the only space in that house where I could escape. School became a nightmare too. Jessica, it turned out, was popular, the kind of girl who could destroy your social life with a few well-placed rumors. Within a month of starting at my school, she'd convinced my friend group that I was weird, clingy, obsessed with my dead mom. Girls I'd known since elementary school started avoiding me. My best friend Emily stopped returning my calls. When I confronted Jessica about it in the bathroom at school, she was touching up her lip gloss in the mirror. What did you tell them? The truth, that you're a freak who cries all the time and makes everything about your dead mom. Nobody wants to hang out with that. She capped her lip gloss and turned to face me. Here's the thing, Clara. You're an inconvenience. To Frank, to my mom, to me. The sooner you accept that and make yourself invisible, the easier this will be for everyone. Within a year, the transformation was complete. I'd gone from being Frank's daughter to being the unwanted reminder of his past life. Sharon made it crystal clear that Jessica was her priority, and Frank made it equally clear that keeping Sharon happy was his top priority. When Sharon wanted something, Frank made it happen. When I needed something, I was told to figure it out myself. I learned to make myself small, to move through that house like a ghost. I got a part-time job at a grocery store at 15, lying about my age, because I was desperate for money. I started paying for my own clothes, my own school supplies, my own everything. I'd eat dinner in my room to avoid Sharon's cutting comments at the table. I'd leave for school early and come home late to minimize contact. The only time Frank seemed to remember I existed was when Sharon complained about me. Clara didn't do the dishes right. Clara was rude to Jessica. Clara didn't mow the lawn the way I wanted. And every time Frank would call me downstairs, stand there with his arms crossed, while Sharon sat on the couch with a satisfied look and lecture me about being grateful, about pulling my weight, about respecting Sharon's authority in her home. Her home, that's what he called it. The house my mother died in, the house I grew up in, was now Sharon's home, and I was just a tenant who didn't pay rent. When I graduated high school, I'd saved enough to move into a shared apartment with 2 other girls. It was the first time I'd felt like I could breathe in years. I enrolled in community college, working full-time at a retail store, taking classes at night. I was studying business administration, dreaming of one day having my own company, being independent, never having to rely on anyone who could withdraw their love as punishment. That's when I met Marcus. He was a regular customer at the store, always friendly, always charming. He was 25, had a good job in sales, drove a nice car. He started asking me out, and after months of his persistence, I finally said yes. I was 20 years old, desperate to be loved, desperate to matter to someone. Marcus made me feel special in a way I hadn't felt since before my mother died. We dated for 2 years. He'd take me to nice restaurants, buy me gifts, tell me I was beautiful. But looking back now, I can see the red flags I ignored. How he'd get angry when I spent time with my roommates. How he'd check my phone. How he'd make comments about my weight, my clothes, my ambitions. How he'd apologize with tears and gifts after every fight promising to change. When I found out I was pregnant at 22, I was terrified. We weren't married, barely stable, and I was still in school, but part of me hoped maybe this would bring us closer. Maybe he'd step up. Maybe we'd become a real family. When I told him, his face went white. He asked if I was sure, asked if I'd considered other options. When I said I wanted to keep the baby, he said he needed time to think. 3 days later, I came home from work to find his apartment completely empty. Not just his things, everything. The furniture we'd bought together, the dishes, the TV, even the food from the refrigerator. His phone was disconnected. His job said he'd quit. His friends said they didn't know where he'd gone. He'd vanished like smoke, leaving me alone and pregnant with nothing but the clothes I'd been wearing at work. I tried to handle it on my own. I really did. I kept working, kept going to school, saved every penny. But my roommates weren't happy about a baby coming. They gave me 2 months' notice to find somewhere else to live. The retail store cut my hours because I was starting to show, and they said customers complained I looked unprofessional. My savings were draining fast, and I was running out of options. That's when I made the call I'd been dreading. I called Frank. I hadn't spoken to him in almost 2 years, not since Sharon had made it clear I wasn't welcome at their house for Christmas. The phone rang 4 times before he answered, his voice cautious. "Clara, Dad, I need help. I'm pregnant and the father left and I have nowhere to go." There was a long silence. Then I heard Sharon's voice in the background, sharp and demanding. Frank sighed heavily. "Come by tomorrow, we'll talk." The next day I drove to the house I'd grown up in. The house that no longer felt like mine. Sharon answered the door, her arms crossed her face, set in an expression that made my stomach turn. She led me to the kitchen where Frank sat at the table, looking older than I remembered, more tired. "So you got yourself in trouble," he said without preamble. The words stung, but I swallowed my pride. "I need a place to stay. Just until the baby comes, until I can get back on my feet. I'll work, I'll pay rent, I'll stay out of your way." Sharon laughed, actually laughed. "You think we run a charity here? We have our own expenses. Jessica is in college, that costs money. We can't afford to support you and a baby." I looked at Frank, hoping he'd say something, anything, but he just sat there staring at his coffee cup. "Please," I said quietly, "I'm your daughter." "You're an adult," Sharon cut in. "Adults handle their own problems. You made your choices." But Frank held up his hand. "Sharon, give us a minute." Sharon huffed but left the room, and Frank finally looked at me. "You can use the attic room. You'll pay $200 a month rent once you're working again. You'll do chores to contribute. And this is temporary, Clara. 6 months maybe. Then you need to be gone." It wasn't what I'd hoped for, but it was something. I agreed. Moving into that attic room felt like moving backward in time. It was the same room I'd had as a teenager, barely changed, still cramped and stuffy. But I told myself it was only temporary. I got a new job at the diner, working as many hours as they'd give me. The manager, Tony, was in his 60s and had the kind of face that made you think he'd never smiled in his life. He made it clear from day one that being pregnant wasn't an excuse for special treatment. You drop a plate, it comes out of your paycheck. You're late, you're fired. You can't keep up, there's plenty of other girls who want this job. He said it all without looking at me, counting the register, his cigarette dangling from his lip. I worked harder than I'd ever worked in my life. My feet swelled so badly that I had to buy shoes 2 sizes bigger. My back ached constantly. I'd come home smelling like fryer grease and old coffee, so exhausted I could barely climb the stairs to that attic room. But I saved every dollar, put it in an envelope hidden under my mattress, counted it every night like a prayer. Living with Frank and Sharon was worse than I'd anticipated. Sharon had given me a list of chores on my first day back, laminated and taped to the refrigerator with my name highlighted in yellow. Clean the bathrooms twice a week. Do all the laundry, vacuum the entire house, mow the lawn, clean the kitchen after every meal. She'd time me actually stand there with her phone making comments about how slow I was, how sloppy. Jessica had gotten worse too. She'd finished her freshman year of college and moved back home for the summer, and she treated the house like a hotel and me like the maid. She'd leave her dishes everywhere, her clothes scattered across the bathroom, her wet towels on the floor. When I'd ask her to clean up after herself, she'd just laugh. That's what you're here for, isn't it? To make yourself useful for once. Frank never intervened. He'd come home from work, eat the dinner I'd prepared, watch TV, and go to bed. When I'd try to talk to him, tell him about the pregnancy, about the baby, he'd just nod and say, "That's nice," his eyes never leaving the screen. It was like I was a ghost in my own father's house, visible only when there was work to be done. The worst part was mealtimes. Sharon insisted we all eat together like we were some kind of normal family. She'd serve herself and Jessica generous portions, give Frank a full plate, and then slide a smaller portion toward me. "You need to watch your weight," she'd say. "You're already big enough with the pregnancy." Jessica would snicker into her napkin, and Frank would say nothing. I started eating in my room, telling them I had to work late shifts. It was easier than sitting at that table, feeling their eyes on me, hearing Sharon's constant comments about how I was a burden, how I should be grateful they let me stay, how I was setting a bad example with my poor choices. When I was about 6 months pregnant, Sharon started bringing it up more directly. "You know," she said one morning while I was scrubbing the kitchen floor, her foot tapping near my hand, "there are programs for girls like you. Programs that can help you, give the baby to a family that can actually provide for it." I sat back on my heels, my hands dripping with soapy water. "I'm keeping my baby." She shrugged. "Just seems selfish. What kind of life can you give it, living in an attic, working at a diner?" "The baby deserves better than that." "Then help me do better," I said, looking up at her. "You and Frank could help me support me be grandparents." Sharon's face hardened. "That baby is not my grandchild. It's the mistake of some loser who ran off and a girl who should have known better. Don't try to make it our responsibility." I went back to scrubbing the floor, blinking back tears, my hands shaking with anger and hurt. That night, I heard Sharon and Jessica laughing in the living room, and when I came down to get water, I saw Jessica had her phone out showing Sharon something. When they saw me, they went quiet, but not before I heard Jessica say, "Just wait, it's going to get so much better." At 7 months pregnant, working the evening shift at the diner became increasingly difficult. My body was changing in ways that made simple tasks feel monumental. Carrying heavy trays made my back spasm. Standing for 8 hours made my ankles swell so badly I had to cut my shoes open. But I couldn't afford to cut back on hours. I needed every dollar. Tony wasn't sympathetic. One night he caught me leaning against the counter, taking a 30-second break to breathe through a contraction. "Get back to work," he barked. "You think customers want to see you looking like you're about to pop? It's disgusting." That word stuck with me. Disgusting. That's what I'd become in everyone's eyes. Not a woman going through one of the hardest experiences of her life. Not someone deserving of basic human compassion, but something disgusting, something to be hidden away and judged. The night of the accident, I'd been on my feet for 6 hours straight. It was a Friday evening, the diner was packed, and we were short-staffed because one of the other waitresses had called out. Tony was in a foul mood, snapping at everyone, threatening to dock pay for any mistakes. I was moving as fast as I could, balancing 3 plates of burgers and fries, heading toward a table by the window. I didn't see the puddle of grease near the kitchen door. Our cook, Ray, had been frying chicken all evening, and the floor was slick with oil that nobody had bothered to clean up. My foot hit that slick spot, and suddenly I was airborne, my body twisting as I tried to protect my belly, the plates flying from my hands. I landed hard on my left side, and I felt my leg bend at an angle that legs should never bend. The crack was audible even over the noise of the diner. For a split second, there was no pain, just shock. Then it hit me, a white-hot agony that radiated from my shin all the way up to my hip. I screamed, I couldn't help it, and the entire diner went silent. But the pain in my leg wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the cramping that started in my belly, sharp and rhythmic, and the wet warmth spreading between my legs. I was lying there on the greasy floor, surrounded by broken plates and scattered food, and all I could think was, "I'm losing the baby. I'm losing my baby. This is all my fault." Tony was furious. He came storming out of his office, saw the mess, saw me on the floor, and his face went red. "Jesus Christ, Clara. Do you know how much those plates cost? This is coming out of your pay, all of it. The plates, the food, everything." I was crying, clutching my stomach, trying to tell him something was wrong, but he just kept going. "And now I have to call an ambulance, deal with workers' comp, get this floor cleaned up. You've been nothing but a problem since you started showing." One of the customers, an older woman, finally stepped in. She crouched down beside me, put her hand on my shoulder, and told Tony to shut his mouth and call 911 right now, or she'd call the health department about his filthy kitchen. Tony went pale at the threat and made the call. The ambulance ride was a blur of pain and fear. The EMTs were kind, telling me to breathe, telling me it would be okay, but I could see the concern in their eyes. At the hospital, they rushed me to labor and delivery, checking the baby's heartbeat, hooking me up to monitors, giving me something for the pain. The baby's heartbeat was strong. That's what they told me first, and I sobbed with relief. But I'd fractured my tibia in 2 places, needed surgery to set it with pins and plates, and the stress had triggered early contractions. They managed to stop the labor with medications, but the doctor was clear. I needed complete bed rest for the remainder of my pregnancy. Any more stress, any more physical activity, and I'd likely go into premature labor. They kept me in the hospital for 3 days, monitoring me and the baby, making sure the contractions didn't start again. A social worker came to talk to me, a young woman named Lisa, with kind eyes and a gentle voice. She asked about my living situation, my support system, my plans for after the baby came. I lied. I told her I had family support, a place to stay, that I'd be fine, because the truth was too humiliating, too painful. The truth was that I was living in an attic with people who resented my existence, working at a job where my boss saw me as a liability, pregnant with a baby whose father had abandoned us. And now I couldn't even work to save money. Lisa didn't believe me. I could see it in her face, but she couldn't force me to accept help I wasn't asking for. She gave me pamphlets for programs, emergency numbers, resources for single mothers. I took them all and stuffed them in my bag, telling myself I wouldn't need them. On the day I was released, I called Frank. I had to. I couldn't drive with my leg in a cast, couldn't walk without crutches, could barely manage to get dressed by myself. The phone rang 6 times before he answered. "Dad, I need you to pick me up from the hospital." Another long silence. What happened? I fell at work. I broke my leg. I need bed rest for the rest of the pregnancy, or I could lose the baby. I heard him sigh, that same heavy sigh I'd heard my whole life whenever I needed something. "Fine, I'll be there in an hour." He was there in 90 minutes, and he wasn't alone. Sharon sat in the passenger seat, her face a mask of irritation. They didn't help me into the car. I had to figure out how to maneuver myself and my crutches into the back seat while they watched. As soon as I was in, Frank pulled out of the parking lot without a word. Sharon was the one who broke the silence. "So you can't work now?" It wasn't a question. "No," I said quietly. "Not until after the baby comes. But I've been saving. I can pay rent for a few months, and then once I recover, I can go back to work." Sharon turned around in her seat to look at me, and the expression on her face made my blood run cold. "You really think we're going to let you stay at our house rent-free, doing nothing for months? And then after the baby comes, what, you expect us to babysit while you work? You think we're going to raise your baby?" "That's not what I said. I just need a place to recover." She turned back around. "We'll see what Frank decides." The ride home was silent, except for Sharon's occasional huffs of annoyance. When we got to the house, Frank pulled into the driveway and turned off the engine. Then he just sat there, staring straight ahead. "Clara," he said finally, his voice flat, "this isn't working out." My heart started pounding. "What do you mean?" "I mean, having you here. You're not contributing, you're costing us money, and now you can't even work. Sharon's right, we can't afford this." "I'm your daughter," I said, my voice breaking. "I'm having your grandchild. You made your choices, now you have to live with them." He got out of the car and walked into the house, leaving Sharon and me sitting there. She turned around again, and this time she was smiling. "You have until you can walk on your own. Then you're out. Figure it out." Over the next 3 weeks, I lived in that attic room like a prisoner. I couldn't navigate the stairs easily with my crutches and my growing belly, so I stayed up there most of the time. Sharon would bring me food occasionally, always the smallest portions, always the leftovers nobody else wanted. Sometimes she'd forget entirely, and I'd go all day with nothing but the crackers and peanut butter I'd hidden away. Jessica found it hilarious. She'd come up sometimes uninvited and sit on the edge of my bed, scrolling through her phone while I tried to rest. She'd make comments about how the room smelled, how I looked, how pathetic my situation was. Once she took a picture of me lying there in my oversized nightgown, my hair unwashed, my eyes swollen from crying, and posted it on social media with a caption about people who make bad decisions. When I confronted her about it, demanded she take it down, she just laughed. "What are you going to do about it? Tell my mom. Tell your dad. They don't care, Clara. Nobody cares about you." I reported the post, but by then it had already been shared dozens of times. People I'd gone to high school with, people I'd worked with, strangers online, all commenting about what a mess I was, how I deserved this, how I should give the baby up for adoption. The humiliation was crushing, but there was nothing I could do. Frank never came up to check on me. Not once in those 3 weeks. I'd hear him downstairs laughing with Sharon and Jessica watching TV, living his life like I didn't exist. A few times I tried to call out to him from the top of the stairs to ask for help, but he'd just turn up the volume on the television. The loneliness was suffocating. I was in a house with people who were supposed to be my family, but I might as well have been abandoned on a deserted island. I'd lie there at night feeling the baby move inside me, talking to him, promising him that somehow I'd figure this out, that I'd protect him, that he'd never feel as unwanted as I did. 3 weeks and 2 days after the accident at 2 a.m, my water broke. I was lying in bed half asleep when I felt the warm gush. For a moment I just lay there in shock, then panic set in. It was too early. I was only 37 weeks. The baby wasn't supposed to come for another 3 weeks. I managed to get myself down the stairs, calling for Frank and Sharon, leaving wet footprints on the carpet. Sharon opened their bedroom door, saw me standing there dripping, and her face twisted in disgust. "Are you serious right now? My water broke. I need to go to the hospital." She looked at Frank, who had appeared behind her in his pajamas, looking confused and annoyed. He glanced at his watch. "It's 2 a.m. "I'm having a baby," I said, starting to cry from fear and pain as the first contraction hit. "Please, I need help." Sharon sighed dramatically, like I'd asked her for a huge favor, rather than literally begging for help in an emergency. "Fine, Frank, get dressed. I'll get the keys." The drive to the hospital felt like it took hours, though it was probably only 20 minutes. Sharon drove while Frank dozed in the passenger seat, and I was alone in the back seat gripping the door handle through contractions, trying not to scream. When we finally got there, they dropped me off at the emergency entrance. "We'll come back in the morning," Sharon said through the window. "Call us when you're done." They drove away before I could respond, leaving me standing there with my hospital bag, my crutches and contractions coming every 5 minutes. Labor lasted 14 hours. It was long and painful and lonely. The nurses were kind, but they were busy with other patients, and I had no one to hold my hand, no one to tell me I was doing great, no one to celebrate with when Leo finally arrived at 4:23 in the afternoon, tiny and perfect and screaming his lungs out. When they placed him on my chest for the first time, I looked into his scrunched-up little face and felt something shift inside me. This was it. This was the person I'd been waiting for. The person who would love me unconditionally. The person who made all of this worth it. I cried as I held him, not from pain or exhaustion, but from overwhelming love and fear. I had no idea how I was going to take care of him, but I knew I'd die trying. Frank and Sharon showed up the next morning, nearly 20 hours after they'd dropped me off. They didn't bring flowers or balloons or even a card. Sharon looked at Leo with an expression that could only be described as distaste, and Frank just nodded and said, "So it's a boy." "His name is Leo," I said, holding my son close. "Would you like to hold him?" Sharon actually laughed. "Why would I want to do that?" She turned to Frank. "How much longer do they keep them here?" "Usually 2 days for vaginal delivery," I said quietly, answering the question she'd asked my father as if I wasn't even there. "Well, you better figure out what you're doing after that." "Our deal was you could stay until you could walk. You can walk now." I looked down at my casted leg. "I can't walk, I have crutches, and I just gave birth 14 hours ago. Not my problem. You have 2 days. Figure something out." They left after 15 minutes, and I sat there in that hospital bed holding my newborn son, realizing with crystal clarity that I had absolutely no one. No partner, no supportive family, no friends I could call on. Just me and Leo against the world. The hospital social worker came back, the same one from before. This time, I didn't lie. I told her everything. The attic room, Sharon's cruelty, Frank's indifference, Jessica's bullying, the fact that I was being kicked out in 2 days with a newborn and nowhere to go. Lisa listened to all of it, taking notes, her face getting more and more concerned. When I finished, she put her hand on mine. "Clara, there are programs that can help you. Emergency housing assistance programs, legal aid. Will you let me help you?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to accept help so badly, but some deep, stubborn part of me, the part that had been conditioned by years of Frank and Sharon, telling me I was a burden, couldn't accept it. "I'll figure it out," I heard myself say. "I always do." Lisa sighed but didn't push. She gave me updated resource packets, made me promise to call if I needed help, and left me with her direct number. On the 3rd day, I was released from the hospital. I called Frank to pick us up. He came alone this time, and he barely looked at Leo as I strapped him into the second-hand car seat the hospital had given me. The ride home was silent. When we pulled up to the house, he turned to me. Sharon means it, Clara. You need to start looking for somewhere else to go. I stared at him, at this man who was supposed to be my father, and felt nothing but cold rage. You're really going to throw out your daughter and your 3-day-old grandson? You're not my responsibility anymore. You're an adult. Adults handle their own problems. I got out of the car, gathered Leo and my things, and walked into that house one last time. I knew somehow, I just knew that this was the beginning of the end. For the next 4 days, I tried to make plans. I called every shelter in the area, but they all had waiting lists. I applied for emergency assistance, but processing took weeks. I looked for cheap apartments, but they all required first and last month's rent plus security deposit money I didn't have. I was trapped in that attic room with my newborn, counting down to an eviction I couldn't prevent. Sharon made those 4 days as miserable as possible. She'd bang on pots and pans when Leo was sleeping, waking him up. She'd turn the heat off, making the house freezing, saying she wasn't paying to heat the whole house for someone who wasn't contributing. She'd stand at the bottom of the attic stairs and yell up at me about what a failure I was, how Leo would grow up to be ashamed of me, how I should have just given him up for adoption. Jessica documented everything on social media. Videos of Leo crying, captions about irresponsible teen moms, though I was 22. Pictures of the attic room, calling it evidence of child neglect. She was building a narrative online, and I realized too late what she was doing. She was setting me up, creating a digital trail that would make me look unfit, that would justify what they were about to do. On the 4th night, it started raining. Not a gentle rain, but a violent storm, the kind that floods basements and knocks out power. I was in the attic feeding Leo when I heard heavy footsteps on the stairs. Frank appeared in the doorway, his face hard as stone. "Pack your things, you're leaving tonight." My blood went cold. Tonight, but it's storming and Leo is only a week old and I have nowhere to go. That's not my problem. You've had plenty of time to figure something out. Sharon is done being patient. "I can't," I said, my voice rising with panic. "Dad, please just give me a few more days. Please." He shook his head. "Pack, now, or I'll throw your stuff out and you'll have even less." I packed what I could fit into 2 bags, my hands shaking, tears streaming down my face. Leo was crying, sensing my distress, and I tried to soothe him while throwing clothes and diapers into bags. I had maybe $300 in cash, a few days' worth of formula. Some clothes for both of us. Everything I owned in the world fit into 2 duffel bags. When I came downstairs with Leo in one arm and a crutch in the other, dragging my bags behind me, Sharon and Jessica were waiting in the living room. Sharon had her arms crossed, looking vindicated. Jessica had her phone out, recording. I stood there in the doorway looking at these people who were supposed to be my family and made one last desperate plea. "Please don't do this. I'm begging you. Where are we supposed to go? It's pouring rain. I have a newborn baby." Sharon's face was like ice. "You should have thought about that before you got pregnant. You should have thought about that before you came crawling back here expecting us to take care of you. You're an adult, Clara. It's time to act like one." I turned to Frank, my father, the man who'd raised me, who'd taught me to ride a bike, who'd walked me to my first day of school. "Dad, please, please don't let her do this." For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Regret maybe, or guilt. But then Sharon put her hand on his arm, and whatever I'd seen disappeared. He stepped forward, and I thought maybe he was going to help me. Instead, he grabbed my crutch right out from under my arm. I stumbled, nearly dropping Leo, and watched in horror as Frank placed the crutch across his knee and snapped it in half with one violent motion. The crack of breaking metal echoed in that entryway like a gunshot. Frank threw the broken pieces at my feet. "If you're going to be a burden, you might as well crawl. That's all you're good for anyway." Behind him, I heard Jessica laugh. I heard Sharon say something about finally having peace and quiet. I heard the storm raging outside, thunder rumbling like the earth itself was angry. And I felt something inside me break open, something that had been building for months, maybe years. Not despair, though there was plenty of that, but rage. Pure crystalline rage at the injustice of it all. I picked up my bags, adjusted Leo in my arms, and looked at each of them one more time. Sharon with her satisfied smile, Jessica with her phone still recording, Frank with his cold, empty eyes. "I will remember this," I said, and my voice didn't shake. "I will remember every single second of this night. All of you, everything you've done. And one day you're going to regret it." Frank actually laughed. He reached past me and opened the door, and the sound of rain intensified, a roaring wall of water. "Get out of my house." He didn't push me. He didn't have to. I walked out on my own, my broken legs screaming with every step into that storm. The door slammed behind me so hard the frame shook, and I heard the lock turn. Through the window, I could see them, all three of them, standing in the warm, dry living room, looking at me. And they were laughing. I stood there on that porch for a long moment, rain soaking through my clothes. Leo crying against my chest. I had no phone, no money except what was in my pocket, nowhere to go. My leg was agony. My body exhausted from childbirth. My heart shattered into so many pieces. I didn't know if it could ever be whole again. But I started walking, because what else could I do? I protected Leo's face from the rain with my jacket, held him close to share body heat, and put one foot in front of the other. Every step sent lightning bolts of pain through my broken leg. I could feel the cast getting soggy, the metal pins in my shin grinding against bone, but I kept walking. I made it maybe half a block before I had to stop. I was leaning against a telephone pole, gasping from pain, when I heard a car. Headlights cut through the rain, and for a wild moment, I thought maybe Frank had changed his mind, maybe he'd come to bring me back. But it wasn't Frank's car. Mrs. Evelyn's ancient Honda pulled up beside me, and she practically leaped out holding an umbrella and a blanket. "Oh my dear God," she kept saying over and over. "Oh my dear God, what have they done?" I couldn't answer. I just stood there shaking, holding Leo, all the adrenaline draining out of me at once. Mrs. Evelyn wrapped the blanket around both of us, helped me into her car with a gentleness that made me want to weep, and drove us to her house. She didn't ask questions that night. She just ran me a hot bath, gave me dry clothes, made up her spare bedroom, and held Leo while I fell apart. I sobbed for hours, great heaving sobs that came from someplace so deep I didn't know it existed. I cried for the family I'd never have, for the father who'd chosen cruelty, for the life I'd imagined that would never exist. I cried until I had nothing left, until I was just an empty shell, sitting in a borrowed nightgown in a stranger's house. But Mrs. Evelyn wasn't a stranger, not really. She'd been our neighbor for 20 years, had known me since I was a child, had been friends with my mother. The next morning, over coffee and toast, she told me something I hadn't known. "Your mother made me promise," she said quietly, "before she died. She made me promise that if you ever needed help, if Frank ever let you down, I'd be there for you. I didn't think it would come to this. I didn't think he'd actually do something like this. But your mother knew. Somehow she knew. I thought of my mother dying in that hospital bed, thinking ahead to protect me, even after she was gone. I thought of the promise Mrs. Evelyn had kept watching and waiting for 10 years. And I thought of Frank, who'd thrown all of that away. "I can't stay here forever," I said. "You've already done so much." Mrs. Evelyn shook her head firmly. "You'll stay until you're ready to go. And then I'm going to help you figure out your next move." I called a friend of mine this morning, a social worker at the Women's Center downtown. They have a program, a shelter specifically for single mothers. It's not a handout, it's a hand up. You'll have a room support job, training, childcare help. Everything you need to get back on your feet. I wanted to say no. I wanted to insist I could handle it alone. But looking at Leo sleeping in a bassinet Mrs. Evelyn had pulled from storage, I realized I couldn't afford pride anymore. I had to think about him, about giving him the best chance, even if it meant accepting help. "Okay," I said. "Okay, I'll try." 2 days later, Mrs. Evelyn drove me to Haven House, a transitional shelter on the east side of town. It was a converted apartment building, clean and safe, housing 30 families at capacity. I was given a room on the 3rd floor, about 200 square feet, with a twin bed, a crib, a small dresser, and a shared bathroom down the hall. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and nobody could throw me out as long as I followed the rules. The rules were actually reasonable. Keep your space clean. Attend the required workshops on parenting, budgeting, and job skills. Meet with your case manager weekly. Look for employment. Save money. Work toward moving out within 6 months to a year. I could do that. I could do all of that. My case manager was a woman named Amanda, probably in her 40s, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. Our first meeting, she laid it out plainly. "Clara, you've been through hell. I get it. But if you want to build a better life, you can't stay stuck in victim mode. You have to decide right now that you're going to fight. Are you going to fight?" I looked at Leo sleeping in my arms. "Yes," I said. "I'm going to fight." "Good, then let's get to work." Over the next month, I focused on healing and planning. My legs slowly improved, and I graduated from crutches to a walking boot. Leo was thriving, growing stronger every day, and the community of women at Haven House became a support system I'd never had before. We watched each other's kids, shared formula and diapers. When someone ran short, sat together in the common room at night, talking about our dreams and fears. I started attending the required workshops, and that's where everything changed. There was a class called Starting Your Own Business, taught by a retired accountant named Mr. Grayson. Most of the women in the class looked skeptical, like starting a business was some impossible fantasy. But I listened to every word. Mr. Grayson talked about finding gaps in the market, about providing services people actually needed, about starting small and growing sustainably. He talked about business licenses and tax IDs and bookkeeping. And as he talked, an idea started forming in my head. After class, I approached him. Mr. Grayson, can I ask you something? Of course, Clara. If someone wanted to start a cleaning business, like a professional cleaning company for offices, how would they do it? He looked at me thoughtfully. Well, you'd need to research your market, see what the competition is doing, figure out your unique selling point. You'd need startup capital, maybe $5,000 to $10,000 for supplies, insurance, licensing. You'd need clients, obviously. Why do you ask? Because I think I could do that. I think I could build something real. He smiled. I think you could too. Tell you what, let's meet next week. Bring me a rough business plan, just your ideas on paper, and we'll work through it together. I spent the next week obsessing over that business plan. While Leo napped, I was at the library researching commercial cleaning companies, their rates, their services, their client reviews. I learned that most big companies were impersonal, sent different crews every time, had high turnover. Small businesses could compete by offering consistency, personal service, and attention to detail. But I needed something more, something that would make my company stand out. That's when I realized my unique selling point was staring me in the face. I'd hire women like me, women from shelters and transitional housing women who desperately needed a chance. But I wouldn't just give them jobs, I'd give them training support, flexibility, and a pathway to stability. The businesses hiring us wouldn't just get clean offices, they'd get the satisfaction of knowing they were part of a social mission. I brought my plan to Mr. Grayson the following week. He read through it carefully, asked questions, made notes. Finally, he looked up at me. This is good, Clara. Really good. The social mission angle is smart. It'll appeal to companies that care about corporate responsibility, but you need capital. Have you thought about how you'll get it? I haven't, I admitted. I have about $400 saved. That's it. He tapped his pen on the table. There are microloan programs for women entrepreneurs, especially women of color and women from disadvantaged backgrounds. The approval process can be tough, but I think you have a real shot. Let me help you with the application. Over the next month, Mr. Grayson and I worked on that application like it was the most important document in the world. Because to me it was. We refined my business plan, created financial projections, wrote an essay about my vision. I poured my heart into that essay, telling my story, explaining why this mattered, why I was the right person to do this. When we finally submitted it, I tried not to get my hopes up. There were probably hundreds of applications, maybe thousands. Why would they choose me? 6 weeks later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, thinking it was a spam call. But something made me pick up. Is this Clara Morrison? Yes, this is Clara. Ms. Morrison, this is Janet from the Small Business Development Fund. I'm calling about your loan application. My heart stopped. Okay. I'm pleased to inform you that your application has been approved. We're awarding you a microloan of $5,000 at a 3% interest rate, repayable over 3 years. I had to sit down. I must have said thank you a dozen times, my voice shaking. When I hung up, I looked at Leo, who was playing with a rattle on a blanket on the floor, and I knew right then that our lives were about to change. I named the company Haven Cleaners. It was my way of honoring Haven House, the place that had saved us, and the concept of a haven, a safe place, a fresh start. The logo was simple, a clean blue H with a small house inside it. Professional but warm. With that $5,000, I bought everything I needed. Commercial cleaning supplies, a used cargo van that barely ran but got the job done, insurance and bonding business cards, a simple website built from a free template. I took a business licensing course at the community college. I studied commercial cleaning techniques on YouTube. I practiced until my rooms at Haven House were the cleanest spaces in the building. Then came the hard part, getting clients. I made a list of every small business within a 5-mile radius. Law offices, accounting firms, medical practices, real estate agencies, anywhere that needed regular cleaning but might not be able to afford the big commercial companies. I dressed in the most professional clothes I owned, a thrift store blazer and slacks, and I started walking into offices with my business card and my pitch. I got rejected a lot at first. Most people took my card politely and said they'd think about it, which was code for no. Some were more direct. We already have a cleaning service. We can't afford it. We need someone with more experience. Each rejection stung, but I kept going. I had to. On my 19th try, I walked into a small law office downtown. The sign said Chen and Associates. The receptionist looked up from her desk and smiled. "Can I help you? I'm here to speak with someone about cleaning services. I know you're busy. I'll only take 5 minutes." She looked uncertain, but then a man's voice came from the back office. "Send them in, Diane." I walked into that office and met David Chen for the first time. He was probably in his early 30s, Asian American, dressed in a sharp suit, but with his tie loosened and his sleeves rolled up. His office was cluttered with case files and law books, and there was a dying plant on his windowsill. He gestured to a chair. "You have 5 minutes. Tell me why I should hire you instead of the company I'm currently using." I sat down, took a breath, and gave him the pitch I'd practiced 100 times. "Mr. Chen, I'm not just offering a cleaning service. I'm offering consistency, attention to detail, and a company with a mission you can feel good about supporting. Every woman I hire is someone getting a second chance, someone working to build a better life. When you hire Haven Cleaners, you're not just getting a clean office, you're being part of something that matters." He leaned back in his chair, studying me. "What's your experience?" "I've worked in food service retail, and yes, I've cleaned houses and offices before. But more importantly, I know what it's like to have everything on the line. I will never take your business for granted. Your office will be spotless guaranteed, or I'll come back and do it again for free." He was quiet for a moment, then he smiled slightly. "That plant is dying, isn't it?" I glanced at the withered fern. "Yes, sir, it needs water and probably better light." "If I hire you, will you water my plants?" "I'll water them, move them to better light, and if they're too far gone, I'll replace them at my own cost." He laughed. "Okay, I'll give you a shot. 1-month trial twice a week, same rate I'm paying now. If you're as good as you say, we'll make it permanent." I could have cried right there. Instead, I shook his hand firmly. "You won't regret this, Mr. Chen." I didn't let him regret it. That first night, I cleaned his office. I stayed until midnight, scrubbing every surface, organizing files, dusting every book, cleaning windows, vacuuming every inch of carpet. I bought a new fern from a grocery store with my own money and put it on his windowsill. When he came in the next morning, his receptionist told me later. He just stood there looking around in amazement. 2 weeks into the trial, David called me into his office. "Clara, my partner, was in yesterday. He wants to know who you are because the office has never looked this good. Can you handle another client?" "I can handle as many as you can refer me to," I said, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. He leaned forward. "I believe in what you're doing. I think you're going to be successful. But you need a lawyer to help you set up your contracts, protect you from liability. Make sure you're doing everything by the book. I'll do it pro bono as a friend, not as a transaction." That's when I started crying. I couldn't help it. After months of people turning their backs, slamming doors, telling me I was worthless here, was this stranger offering to help me for nothing? Why, I managed to ask. "Because I've been where you are," he said quietly. "Not exactly, but close enough. And someone helped me. Now I'm helping you. Pay it forward someday." David became more than my lawyer. He became my mentor, my friend, my biggest advocate. He referred me to 3 more clients within that first month. And those clients referred me to others. Word spread about the young woman with the cleaning company that had heart, that hired women who needed second chances, that did exceptional work. Within 3 months, I had 8 clients and had to hire help. I went back to Haven House and talked to Teresa, a woman I'd become friends with. She was smart, hardworking, trapped in a cycle of bad luck and worse choices. I offered her a job at $12 an hour, flexible scheduling around her kids and training. She cried and said yes. Then I hired Maria and Keisha and Jennifer, women who'd been through hell and come out fighting. I trained them not just in cleaning techniques, but in professionalism, customer service, attention to detail. I taught them that this work mattered, that we weren't just cleaners, we were businesswomen providing an essential service. We were good, really good. Our clients started calling their friends, and their friends called us. Within 6 months, Haven Cleaners had 15 regular clients and 6 employees. I was working 18-hour days, cleaning during the day, doing paperwork at night, taking care of Leo whenever I had a spare moment. But I didn't mind. For the first time in my life, I was building something that was mine. I moved out of Haven House into a small 2-bedroom apartment in a safe neighborhood. It wasn't fancy, but it had a bedroom for Leo, a kitchen table, a bathroom that didn't smell like mold. I cried the day I got the keys, standing in that empty apartment, thinking about how far we'd come. 1 year after that terrible night in the rain, Haven Cleaners had 20 employees and 35 regular clients. We'd cleaned hundreds of offices, built a reputation for excellence, and I'd managed to save $10,000 in the company account. I bought a second van, hired an office manager, created an employee training program. But I never forgot where I came from. I never forgot that night. And I never not once forgot the look on Frank's face when he broke my crutch, or Sharon's satisfied smile, or Jessica's mocking laughter. I didn't hear from them at all during that year. No phone calls, no texts, no attempts to reach out. As far as they were concerned, I'd probably ended up on the streets or given Leo up for adoption, exactly what Sharon had suggested. They'd written me off completely. Then one day, about 18 months after I'd started Haven Cleaners, I got a phone call that changed everything. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to walk away from toxic family members? Have you ever had to choose yourself when everyone said you were being selfish? Drop a comment below and share your story. You never know who needs to hear that they're not alone. And if this story moved you, if it reminded you of your own strength, hit that like button and subscribe. Sometimes we all need to be reminded that we're capable of extraordinary things, especially when people bet against us. Remember, every queen was once a girl who refused to stay on her knees. Every empire started with someone who refused to accept the life they were given. Every phoenix rose from ashes someone else set on fire. Your story isn't over, it's just getting started.